bring this meeting of Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen. Here. Councilmember Grimes.
Here.
Councilmember Mail.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Snipper.
Here. Okay. First thing we'll do is go to public comment period. If anybody would like to comment on anything not on our voting session agenda, please come to the podium and identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes, and welcome.
Hi. It's wonderful to see the new council. I know each and every one of you work very hard, and so I'm excited. Well, my name is Tababu Assafa. I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, in Ward 4 at 7777 Maple Avenue. I have my wife. Can you please join me? My wife, my partner, is here with me, and my 2 kids. Yarit, come here, Helena. Where's Yarit? Come here, Yarit. I'm asking my family to come here for the very first time because it's what I've done for the last 7-8 years has been on behalf of my family, for my family, and for the very first time, this is a very significant milestone in our journey today. We're here to submit a proposal to you for your consideration, and it's about Blessed Coffee. Blessed Coffee is came out of a dream we had as a family to live a life of purpose, a life of mission, a life that celebrates culture, a life that celebrates community. And that journey has come to fruition. We're at the first milestone, and we're very, very excited. We put together a nice proposal for you to consider. And what we seek at this moment is for you to look at the proposal we have before you. I have given it for you to look at that overview proposal and give us an opportunity to appear before the council to give a presentation, a full-blown presentation on our model. We're very excited. Like I said, I'm so excited I can't even speak for the very first time. I'm finding myself being speechless. Like I said, it's a long journey. It's a business model that we've developed. My people are coming. Thank you. We've developed with local significance and international relevance. It's a business model that celebrates community, celebrates culture, wants to use culture to create a social space where the community can come together to build a relationship and create an engaged community on one level, and also to bridge 200,000 small coffee farmers with the consumer here in our local community, local market, to create a living economy that connects us together, and resources generated from that to be dedicated to social and economic development on both sides of the community. Since I have 4 people, I will have the courtesy of extending me two more minutes. I will speak on all their behalf. So moving forward, the inauguration gave us a massive support that we did not anticipate. We initially had a slow cooking timeline for our business plan. We're going to take it because it's a new model. We're very careful. We're going to ask the community to invest in it. So we took a very deliberate, by intention, by design, we took a slow cooking process. But that inauguration and the tremendous amount of coverage, the tremendous amount of love and support from the community gave us the boldness to say, okay, we can accelerate it a little bit. So as a first move after the inauguration, we have a wonderful little concept with the big idea at the core, and you have it before you in that proposal. I would kindly request that you give it all the love and the care that it requires, because we've put our passion, our lives, our dreams, our aspiration into it, and we look forward for the opportunity to give you a full-blown official presentation on Blessed Coffee, and then by then I think you would be able to see the whole scope and consider the proposal that we put before you. And I thank all the community behind me, all the community in Tacoma Park, Maryland. I know some of them are watching on TV, for the love and support. We've touched a lot of people. We've made a lot of relationships, and we thank all of them. So that's it. Hopefully soon we'll get that opportunity to come before you to explain the details of our passion-driven concept. And is there anything you want to say? Okay. Rina, you want to say something? I thought you were the boss. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, my friends and family, for.
Thank you. Some pertinent information is that I know that we're going to have the report of the Tacoma Junction Task Force on January 17th. And I know that there has been some talk there about some options about what to do with the city lot in Tacoma Junction. And so it'll be interesting. I know that there has been at least one other expression of interest in putting something there. I know that my sense is that there have been other options talked about at the task force, and that knowing that you have this proposal, it'll be interesting to kind of combine all of this and see how each informs the other, and that I would imagine that the council will, once we've had that report from the task force, will be ready to put together some discussions about where we might want to go, what we might want to do, and that would be the opportune time to have that presentation.
Thank you.
We look forward to that.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. We've looked at all those challenges that we have at the junction. We've looked at it for a long time. We are aware of the environmental issues, the traffic issues, and our concept chose that place deliberately because we bring the most value to that area. Ultimately, we want to put Tacoma Park on the map. We're looking for a home base for Blazed Coffee, as Seattle is for Starbucks. This scope, it has that scope. And I know with the support of the community, because it is a benefit corporation, because it's a community business for the community, by the community, we'll get there. So I don't think, with all due respect to others who have interest in the area, we stand strongly feeling confident. We bring visibility, foot traffic, history. We'll put Tacoma Park on the map.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak at public comment? Yes. Councilmember Barnes.
I'd like to add to that the Old Tacoma Business Association won a grant funded by the state of Maryland for an expert consultant study of that is being applied specifically to 4 commercial spaces in Tacoma Junction that includes the city lot. So that will provide additional information that the council may wish to consider at the appropriate time.
Good. Thanks.
My name is Bob Shovlin. I live at 319 Boyd. I'm here to support Tababu and Blessed Coffee. Also, I'm really curious about the green at FERC when you don't have any bike parking. And Councilmember Snipper also commutes to and from work. I rode my bike here. I don't see any bike parking out in the back.
There used to be. We used to have bike racks.
It's very green, but you don't provide bike parking.
There's a in front of the police station down on the parking level, the moat, as I call it.
Yeah, but that's down below. Why not in back of a building where, I mean, I don't want to park down there. I mean, parking garages are a pain in the ass. They're also the most dangerous places you can be. Thank you.
Thank
you. And I hope you support Mr. Babu.
I'm Alice Sims, and I just want to say, too, that I'm here to support Tababu, and I hope you all will be able to figure out a good place for him to have his blessed coffee.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. We will bring the public comment period to a close, and we will move on to council comments. Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 quick items. One, I want to wish everybody a happy holidays. It's the holiday season. I hope folks will be careful when they're out driving, not only for themselves, that they'll be careful, but to watch out for those folks who maybe aren't careful. I'd hate to see any accidents. And the second thing I want to do is give some feedback to Ward 5 in particular, but also the rest of Tacoma Park, that the city hasn't forgotten the Flower Streetscape project, the Green Street, and it will be moving forward. The city is working on the RFP for the design. When that's released, when the design contractor is selected, that's when the community meetings will begin to work on the design. So sort of check back often, and we'll let you know when that's moving forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes?
Thank you, Mayor Williams. Three things. One quickly, I note with thanks to the State Highway Administration, although they're probably not monitoring our meeting, for filling a pothole that was particularly severe on Philadelphia Avenue that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. And then also very quickly addressing some pedestrian and traffic signals that were out on Route 410. Next, County Council member George Leventhal intends to introduce a zoning text amendment in the County Council tomorrow. It won't be discussed then. It will be discussed later. That would allow accessory kitchens on churches and other similar institutions. That would be throughout the county. And I will be looking to assist the people who are behind that at the Presbyterian Church to try to build community support. And then lastly, I want to mention something that probably most of us are familiar or aware of. I know with sadness the death of Walt Rave, who was a resident of my ward, but he was more than that. He was a Tacoma Park fixture in any number of ways. Present on the streets of Tacoma Park, recognizable by the fox pelt that he carried in a trap, which was an attempt to get people to engage him in a conversation that would quickly turn to animal abuse. Walt also worked for at least 17 years for the city of Tacoma Park part-time as the tool librarian. He was in the best of Tacoma Park tradition, as we like to imagine ourselves. He was someone who cared very deeply and passionately about matters that would improve life for all of us, not only locally but globally. Thank you.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. I also have a couple of comments, and it's a little hard to be, in this moment, really jolly and festive in the face of two rather sad events. My heart goes out to the two Tacoma Park police officers who were involved in a life-ending tragedy of a suspect for the second time this year. I'm also concerned for the victim of the carjacking, who was stabbed several times, and wishing them a speedy recovery. I'm sorry for the family of the 19-year-old deceased subject involved. It's hard for me to understand how these things occur, but the reality is that they do. I'm thankful that Tacoma Park has a police department that does what needs to be done, no matter how difficult, in the face of real danger. And then there's the tragic death of Walt Rave. Here are a few excerpts from the comments that I've read on the listserv. A great, if unsung hero, passed away surrounded by his many fans from burns that he received in a house fire. At 6'3" with a bushy red beard, Walter Rave was an imposing figure, even at his ripe age of 66. After returning from Vietnam in 1970, he decided to devote his life to nonviolence and particularly to animal advocacy. He spent the next 40 years doing things that some of us merely fantasize about. Walter has been and will continue to be an inspiration to those of us who are fortunate enough to know him. Another comment was, he was a radical in a village where he professed the rights for all creatures, large and small, and that they were rights to be reckoned with in every given moment. This is me. He was a very special part of our exceptional city. I'm honored to have had my path cross his fabulously eccentric path, even if only for a moment. He will be missed. And I am wishing everyone a special and happy holiday and a super healthy and happy new year. These are moments that remind us to be so thankful for all that we have and be willing to pass it on to everyone that we touch, not only during this season, but during the whole year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Schultz.
Thank you. Several items. I received a notice today from the Prince George's County Police Department, specifically from Major Hector Velez, wanting to inform particularly Ward 6 residents, but to a certain degree Tacoma Park residents about the fact that the Prince George's County Liquor Board is getting ready to hold a public hearing on several liquor licenses that are along University Boulevard adjacent to Tacoma Park. It's also the part of the city that I represent on the city council. And one of these, a place that has a current liquor license, is put in to the liquor board for a special entertainment license. Now, this place is called Crystals. It's in La Union Mall, I'm told, although I may have my facts a little wrong. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's where it is. Crystals has been mentioned with regard to some recent problems that have arisen over in that area that have spilled over into Tacoma Park. In October, this past October, there was after I'm told a number of young people who had left Crystals or one of the other entertainment venues in La Union Mall got into a big gang-style brawl in the middle of Aldi's parking lot, which the Tacoma Park Police and the Prince George's County Police worked together to control, and they arrested some of the kids. Most of the young people ran away. But it was extremely alarming, and there's been other incidents similar to that. And so there's this public hearing. The Carroll Highlands community, which borders us on the Prince George's County line, if you go up, it's over there behind the New Hampshire Towers, along Erskine Street, 15th, 16th, 17th Street, all the way over towards Riggs Road. They're very, very concerned about the implications of Crystals getting a special entertainment permit, and are encouraging Tacoma Park residents to testify at the hearing, as is Major Velez points out that of the Prince George's Police Department, that this kind of testimony can have a tremendous amount of weight with the Prince George's County Liquor Board. People need to be aware of it. The hearing is day after tomorrow, December 14th. The hearing starts at 6 p.m. There's about a dozen liquor licenses in the northern part of Prince George's County, many of them on University Boulevard, down around Riggs Road in that area, including the TikTok liquors that are seeking these kind of special entertainment licenses. Crystals is the one that's closest to our city of Tacoma Park, and anybody who is interested in voicing their concerns as a resident of this nearby area that could pose a continuing threat when we've already seen alarming results from the kind of activities that go on in these nightclubs and these go-go clubs, as they're called. I would encourage you to take this under consideration, and if everybody wants more information, can certainly contact me directly. Again, that hearing is this Wednesday at 6 p.m. The Liquor Board meets over on Rhode Island, its offices on Rhode Island Avenue in Hyattsville. Second, I want to thank, I guess I want to ask Barb Matthews to pass along my thank yous to the Park Division, which apparently responded again to our request to deal with a homeless encampment in the woods just below the Rebecca Lilly Park. I walked through there the other day. They have come through and cleaned out what was there. They've also done another huge job of suppressing and removing invasive species, which is a repeat of what they did this past summer. and I'm really grateful for that. It's making a huge difference in the viability of that ecological system. This is not an area where people normally walk. There's no paved area in there, but it is a natural area, and it's been threatened by huge amounts of invasive species and also homeless encampments. And the the final thing I want to mention, and this was brought, I noticed this, and Mayor Williams also noticed this concern, is that during the election on November 8th, the number of us who were standing out front trying to meet with voters realized that standing on Maple Avenue after it had gotten very dark, that it was totally dark outside on the front side of our community center, a very beautiful building from many aspects, and that there's no facade lighting on that. It's kind of funny that we have a legacy grant program to help businesses improve their facades, and we don't have a facade that's lit up in the evening. It was strange because there was no light by which voters could see the people that we were sort of like seeing silhouettes in the middle of the night, and people were saying, "Is that you, Fred?" And I'd say, "Who's that?" And they'd say, "Oh, it's me," all this kind of stuff. So I'm wondering if there's money somewhere in our budget where we can think about casting some light, either ground light, along the footways out there, or lights casting onto the building itself to sort of light it up so that people recognize it as the official address of the city of Tacoma Park. That's sort of an open-ended, at this point, rhetorical question, because I don't expect anybody to come back with any answers tonight. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all for coming tonight. It's nice to see the chairs filled this evening for this session. I'd just like to follow up on one thing that Councilmember Schultz was talking about with the liquor license. It was a couple years ago that the owner of the Tijuana Mexican restaurant came in here and talked about the nice family restaurant he was going to have on University Boulevard, the same University Boulevard that Councilmember Schultz was just talking about. But since that time, and we supported his application for alcoholic beverage license, the family restaurant has been opened into the wee hours of the morning, and through the several years since it's been opened, there have been periodic violent events there. He is contracted with off-duty police officers to provide security there. And as recently as this last week, there was another person arrested at that restaurant. And I would just like to ask the mayor if maybe we could schedule an opportunity for the owner to come back in and talk with us again to see why we should continue to support his serving alcoholic beverages into the wee hours in the morning. Secondly, I would like to just say that I will miss my friend Walt. He was more than just an activist. He was just a good guy, nice guy. I remember last year when my wife and I were working cutting vines off of a tree, or several trees, and Walt saw us, and he stopped and went home and got his machete and came back and helped us for a couple hours complete the job. It's just the kind of guy he was, just an all-around nice guy. And then lastly, I would like to ask the city manager, Sunday night I was down here at the community center, and as I left, I looked over and I saw the flagstaff over by the library, and I couldn't see it very well, but I could see in the dark that it still had a flag hanging on it. It was hung at half-mast, and I wasn't sure what the occasion was that we had the flag at half-staff. Anyways, I'd appreciate back if you could advise the council on what the regulations are for the displaying of a flag, and whether we do follow those regulations, or whether we have to follow those regulations. Just kind of an all-around report on that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I'd like to add my sadness at the passing of Walter Rave, and the added dimension that I'd like to speak about for a second is I know that there has been some discussion in the community about an appropriate way to honor him, and there have been those types of discussions as we have lost various valued members of our community. And what I would like to do is schedule a discussion for the council so that we can talk about various opportunities and options that we might want to provide or that we already provide as ways to honor residents of our community. There have been various times when people wanted to rename parks or rename streets, or we have the naming of the area where the farmers market is on Sundays that has it's Ward Sinclair Plaza. I'm not sure the sign is still up there. I understand that there's a history where at one point in time the city had plaques that were associated with street trees, and that at some point in time before I was aware of it, they were all removed. And so that there may have been programs that the city had.
Pepco probably cut them down.
There may have been opportunities in the past. I know we also have the bricks out in front of the community center, so I thought just a general discussion of that and be able to provide people with some options for honoring residents in our community. I also just wanted to briefly add my sadness at the incident on Saturday where there was the carjacking and the police pursuit and the death of the suspect. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the efforts of our police department in keeping our community safe, and also my sense that they do a really terrific job of doing that in ways that follow the law and always attempt to keep all of us safe. And I'm sad that this incident ended that way, and it's sad for the victim of the carjacking, for the young man who was killed, and for all of the people who were there and who saw all of this unfold and experienced this. And I hope that these kinds of incidents are at a minimum or do not continue in this community, just because they affect so many people in such a terrible way. The third thing I'd just like to mention is to make sure that people know that the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning staff is going to be providing the draft of the design guidelines that the city and the Park and Planning have been working on. I believe they're going to be making those available this week, and the city will have those so that we can post those so that people can take a look at them. And we have a discussion on those coming up on the council agenda on January 23rd. So that'll be an opportunity for people to have some time to look at that. And I think there will also be a community meeting scheduled for giving people an opportunity to see those and ask questions and talk about them, so that once we get the presentation here and the discussion, there will have been an opportunity for the community to have some information. Any other council comments? Okay, we will move along to the city manager's comments.
Thank you. Just a few items this evening. I'll be very brief. Just on behalf of the city staff, I would also like to note the passing of Walt. He worked for the city for 19 years, and I think for any of us who had the privilege of working with him can speak to his dedication to the tool library and just his love of what he did. I would also like to share with the council, we just learned of this very recently, that Betty Barclay, who was the city's library director for a number of years, passed away in mid-November. Her son still lives in the community. Ellen Robbins, our library director, has been in touch with the family, and Mayor, I would like to talk to you about possibly doing a resolution of condolence for the family sometime in January when the council comes back from recess. In regard to Tijuana's, Councilmember Siemens, you and I must be kind of on the same wavelength because I have been having a number of discussions with the city staff about that establishment. During one of the incidents, I believe it was last month, the police department did report to me that there were also some rather unsanitary conditions in the restroom of the restaurant. I did ask the police department to please report that occurrence to the Montgomery County Health Department. In light of some of the police activity at the establishment, I did talk to Chief Ricucci last week, and then, of course, this incident over the weekend, and ask if the police department could compile sort of a comprehensive list of some of the activity at that establishment so the council could then perhaps have a discussion about whether you would like staff to share that information with the Montgomery County Liquor Board. Our assumption is that you would, but there certainly has been a number of incidents at that establishment of concern to everyone. Did want to thank the council just for your comments this evening and some of the emails over the weekend regarding the stabbing and the police-involved shooting on Saturday. I did talk to the police department earlier today. The stabbing victim, who is a Tacoma Park resident, was still in critical condition as of this afternoon. I believe he was taken into surgery for the third time since the stabbing Saturday afternoon. The officers involved in the shooting are on administrative leave, as the council is aware, and will likely remain on administrative leave for probably several months. The Prince George's County Police Department will be handling the investigation, and just want to assure the council that the city and the department are providing the support that we can to the officers involved in the shooting. Certainly it's a traumatic time for them as well as many other people, as the council has noted this evening. We will not be making any further statements other than the chief's press statements on Saturday about the incident. Basically, the Prince George's County Police Department will be the one addressing anything involved with the police officer shooting. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Next item is adoption of minutes. We have one set of minutes for November 28th. Would somebody like to move those?
Move.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, second by Councilmember Siemens. Anything on the minutes? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Minutes carry. We will now move to our special session, the first of three items, and this is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract to replace a failed boiler unit, rooftop unit for heating and cooling of the Commuter Learning Center, and I believe the Public Works Director is here. She can explain, but meantime, Councilmember Snipper has moved it. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved by Councilmember Snipper, second by Councilmember Siemens. Ms. Braithwaite.
Not too much to say other than this is a unit that stopped functioning due to compressor failure, two compressors within the unit itself. So the work that we're trying to do is just replace those compressors. The rest of the unit will stay in place. So it isn't actually a full replacement, it's just a repair. Given the cost of the repair, it requires council approval. We did talk with the city manager and the city attorney. Given the council recess and given the nature of the system involved and the concern about heating in the meantime, we thought this was an emergency matter that needed your attention as quickly as possible. We did solicit, not through the traditional way of closed bids, but did get three prices from companies that we do business with for the repair. The lowest bid is there before you. We're recommending that you award a single reading ordinance for this. Again, it wasn't an item that was planned for or known about in the budget, so it typically would not be part of a single reading ordinance, but due to the emergency nature of the repair, we're asking that it be considered in a single reading, and we do have funds in the budget for repair within the building maintenance budget, so these funds would come out of that building maintenance repair budget.
City manager has some additional.
Yeah, I just wanted to just call to the council's attention that one of the provisions of the city code, and it is incorporated into the ordinance before you this evening, is that I made a determination that this constituted an emergency procurement, but one of the city's code provisions is that the council essentially concurs with that determination, and that language is contained in Section 1 of the ordinance you're considering this evening.
Okay. Councilmember Snipper.
Quick question. I remember when this was installed. It doesn't seem that long ago. So it's out of warranty? Is that the issue?
Yeah, the warranty is 12 months from the date of service.
I'll just ask. Sometimes when something fails just outside the warranty period, you give them a call and they give you a break or something like that?
This is about 5 years outside the warranty.
Is it
period.
really that long? Doesn't seem that long. Wow. 5 years, is that right? Seems like yesterday.
Yeah, time flies. I'll attest to that.
And my question about that is, do we have any concerns about those compressors within those units?
Yeah.
Whether we have other ones in other units where we have other chances of failure, or are we susceptible to the potential here?
Well, we haven't seen anything similar to this before. It's a fairly unique situation, though not all our rooftop units are identical make and manufacture, so it is something I've asked the building maintenance supervisor to take a look at. He was, unable to say why this happened or what happened. It just did happen, and occasionally that will happen with pieces of equipment. We haven't seen anything similar to this before. It has been in operation, for several years, though it is something that you would anticipate having a much longer life.
Yeah,
Again, the rest of the components are there. It's just the compressors themselves that went bad.
Because my sense on those types of compressors, at least in a residential setting, is that you assume somewhere in the 15-year range, so 5 years or 6 years is pretty short.
So it's 5 years after we...
So it's 6, yeah. And is it a do we have, in terms of the other compressors, do we have all the same type of compressor?
I don't have that detailed information, but we can look
Because
into it.
I know that there are scroll compressors and non-scroll compressors.
Don't know what this one is.
Okay. Councilmember Snipper.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I had my second question I forgot to ask you. This is coming out of the operating budget
Yes,
of Public Works?
right, the building maintenance.
Didn't we just set up an equipment repair?
It's a building maintenance equipment replacement. If the entire equipment was to be replaced due to aging out or a scheduled replacement, it would be part of the
Okay.
building equipment maintenance. We have had an equipment replacement reserve previously. We're now trying to establish one specifically for building maintenance items.
Great.
Even if that had been in place and fully funded, this wouldn't fit within that category because we're not replacing the entire piece of equipment for aging out. We're just replacing some components within the equipment itself.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Kind of a strange question, but are all three of these agencies within the city limits, or are they outside of the city limits of Tacoma Park?
Oh, the companies that...
Yes, the companies.
I don't think any of them exist within the city.
City limits. Are there any companies that we might contract with that are within the city limits, not?
There are companies within the city that we contract with. I don't think any for this type of work.
For this type of work, okay, thanks.
Any further questions from council? Any public comments? Okay, seeing none, since this is a single reading ordinance, it requires a roll call vote. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Aye.
Councilmember Grimes.
Yes.
Councilmember Mao.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. We will move to our next item, which is a resolution establishing a council compensation committee and appointing members. Somebody like to move it?
I'll move it.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Schultz, second by Councilmember Snipper. Discussion, comments? City Clerk.
I did have a question, and that is there some sense that there'll be other people appointed to this, or do you want this group to go forward as is?
Anybody have any potential members?
So it would just be helpful to know.
My sense is that this group could go forward.
Okay.
Any public comments on this resolution? Okay. All those in favor of the resolution establishing a council compensation committee and appointing members, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. And we now move to our consent agenda. It has two items, a resolution appointing members to the redistricting task force and a resolution appointing member to the ethics commission. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mayor Williams,
Yes.
I didn't catch the motion maker.
Yeah, you have to have a motion maker.
What do we need that for? We'll move along.
Right down.
Okay. Moved by Councilmember Snipper.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Grimes. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Now the ayes have it. We will now move to our work session item, which is a discussion of current year budget matters. And this is the city manager.
Sure, thank you. There is no council action required this evening. I just thought it might be helpful to go through some of these items in preparation for a budget amendment that will likely be submitted to the council in January following the recess. The first item that I just wanted to bring to the council's attention has to do with the city's workers' compensation insurance. As some of the more tenured members of the council may remember, we were with the Montgomery County Self-Insurance Program for a number of years. We were seeing some fairly significant rate increases. So beginning in fiscal year 11, we went with the Injured Workers Insurance Fund. This was actually a return to them. I think the city had been insured with them probably back in the late 80s, early 90s, as I understand it. As is customary with workers' compensation, following the conclusion of the fiscal year, the Injured Workers Insurance Fund, which I'll just refer to by the acronym IWIF, just for the sake of brevity, conducted a payroll audit to determine whether or not the premium that the city had paid based on its payroll estimates kind of matched what we had actually incurred in terms of payroll cost. The initial audit finding was that the city owed an additional premium of over $215,000. To say I was close to having a heart attack would be an understatement. The staff kind of went through those proposed audit adjustments from IWIF. There were a number of coding errors that we felt had been done by the IWIF auditor, some other exceptions that we took to his analysis, and we were successful in negotiating the final amount of the premium due to just over $56,000. Did go back and work with the human resources manager who had originally prepared some of the payroll estimates to see what the difference was. And the largest variance had to do with overtime cost. When we were making the initial application to IWIF, they were provided with base payroll information, and in fact some things that the city provides, such as language pay and overtime, actually do count towards base pay for the purposes of workers' compensation. So that was the single largest cause of the variance. This is really not something that's discretionary. We do owe IWIF that $56,000 and some change. One of the things I also did want to perhaps suggest to the City Council is that we consider making a supplemental premium payment to IWIF in fiscal year 12. At some point, we are going to need to bring our premiums for a fiscal year more in line with what our payroll costs are. We can either do that this year, and I do think there are some personnel cost savings that could be applied to that, or we can simply budget kind of a super-duper amount, if you will, in fiscal year 13. But at some point, we are going to have to bring those premiums in line with what we're actually paying. Otherwise, we'll keep having this cycle of audits being done and are owing more money. So in a nutshell, that's what's going on with workers' compensation insurance. I don't know if the council has any questions.
I've got two questions. First, what's our overall payment for workers' comp, approximately?
I believe what was budgeted this year was about $340,000. If we had stayed with Montgomery County, this is going back to FY11.
That was my second question.
If we go back, I'm going off memory here, Mayor Williams, but my recollection is if we had stayed with Montgomery County in fiscal year 11, we would have owed over $500,000.
So
it's still, even with this,
even with this, it's a savings, and it sounds like with the first figure that IWIF came back with, it would have put it back up where we would have been if we had stayed with the county.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Mayle.
Does it concern you at all in the long term that they came to you with an initial estimate of $215,000? If they were making those sorts of errors this time, do we have to pay attention next year and the year after and the year after?
I would say as a city staff, we always try to pay attention. Some of the council members know I worked as a personnel director for 10 years, so I have some knowledge in this area, so I could sort of eyeball it when it first came in and could see what the errors were. I have had some discussions with our broker, actually within the last few weeks, to express exactly the concern that you noted, which is certainly as a city staff, we should be vigilant about scrutinizing these things, but I found it somewhat disturbing that we got the initial figure that we did, because some of the errors were very glaring. For example, without getting too technical, there are codes assigned to each position in the city or anywhere. Those codes somewhat follow what the risk is associated with that position. So in our case, we have kind of clerical administrative workers, commissioned police staff, and then basically everybody else. The initial audit report that we got back from IWIF included myself, Yvonne Brooks, our finance director, Karen Hampton, our human resources manager, in the same grouping as our public works staff. I mean, those were the type of glaring errors. My guess is that it wasn't any attempt to be deceptive. I think the auditor is probably overworked. Like many governmental employees, IWIF is actually a state agency, and probably just simply did not have the time. That's not an excuse. It was something I was very upset about. But I would say it will make us hyper-vigilant every time we get audit findings back. The one thing I would note is there are very limited options to the city as far as its workers' compensation insurance coverage. There are private carriers who insure employers, but because we have a police department, that does limit the number of options we have in terms of workers' compensation coverage.
Councilmember Schultz.
I guess was one clarification. Did this error of about $56,000 or adjustment, if that's a better word, was that partly a result of our literal underestimating the amount of overtime that would be accrued in that FY11, or was it a misunderstanding or misinterpretation on our part as to the application of the that overtime needed to be included and it wasn't included?
It was the latter. I think it was just a lack of understanding that overtime was part of the payroll information that should have been reported to IWIF. There were that was the primary cause. There were some other factors, such as we have a number of independent contractors who work for the city. There was recently a change in state law that if those individuals cannot demonstrate that they were insured elsewhere under workers' compensation, that becomes they become covered under the city's policy. That played a very minor part of this. Most of it was overtime, but there were a few other nuances to what contributed to the $56,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Did that make sense, Councilmember Schultz?
Yes, it does. I was just reflecting back to the time when my understanding was that this is a government we're talking about here, but businesses at one time were not required to provide workers' comp if they had less than, they had one or two employees or something like that. And if the time they added their third, then they had to pay into workers' comp. So that's why I was sort of puzzled, giving you a puzzled look with regard to having an independent contractor. A lot of these people are single-person entities. But the law requires, as the municipality, to cover people who are, quote, independent.
Yeah, actually, it's any employer. It's not just a municipality. One of the things that we're currently going through, and kind of part of the issue you just raised, we are trying to direct some of the folks who perform services for us under an independent contractor arrangement of options they have to get workers' compensation insurance. One of the things we found with you all as council members is your actual coverage levels will exceed your pay because there's certain minimum thresholds for workers' compensation. So some of our folks who work, basically on a part-time basis as an independent contractor are finding that the cost of workers' compensation insurance is exorbitant for them. So one of the things we're still going through the process in the wake of this audit is trying to juggle the need to hire people to perform certain services And if we require them to provide evidence of workers' comp, they may not be willing to work for us because they're working such a limited number of hours that it may not be cost effective. So that's still something that we're trying to figure out the best arrangement.
It sort of redefines or suspends the typical meaning of what independent stands for.
That's correct.
And the fact that your premiums, say for us, I mean, we're not liable to get too injured on the job. Say it's not quite the same as being a commissioned police officer in terms of risk, that it's sort of reaching the boundaries of absurdity, and it makes me want to query the rest of us if there isn't something wrong with the state law as opposed to how we do business here in the city of Tacoma Park.
The only thing I will say is, I think some of you know, I formerly worked for a municipality where actually a number of their elected officials were actually killed in the line of duty. So it does happen, unfortunately. I think there are some issues with the state law in terms of independent contractors, because you're correct, it sort of turns the idea of an independent contractor on its head.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. The next item, and Sarah Daines, our Director of Housing and Community Development, is here to kind of pinch hit and to help out. We allocated $80,000 in the FY 2012 budget, specifically the Speed Camera Fund, for preliminary design work for the Ethan Allen Streetscape project. As some of the council members who were involved in the FY 12 budget adoption may recall, this funding was to be used for doing surveying work, design and development of construction documents, and various other preliminary activities. We had applied for some community legacy funding for this project, and some of the comments that came back regarding our application is that we needed to be further along in the process and actually have something to show to the state of what the project actually would look like. We have 3 engineering firms under contract. Those were approved several years ago by the City Council. Sarah and her staff did contact each of those 3 engineering firms to get a sense of what this work may actually cost. And suffice to say, the process will be much more expensive than the $80,000 that's included in the Speed Camera Fund budget. The Housing and Community Development Department is requesting an additional budgetary allocation from the Speed Camera Fund of $95,000 for a total of $175,000 for this work. Some of the factors that contributed to the increase are related to stormwater management in the area. We do believe there may be some possible on-site soil contamination in the area that will require further assessment. And basically probably just a more defined scope than perhaps we had last spring when we were first talking about this. There have also been some changes in environmental regulations at the state level that would impact this. The firm that I think Sarah and her firm are recommending, which is RKK, they have done a lot of work with the Public Works Department, who has highly recommended them. So if the council is amenable, we would increase the funding level for this particular project. If not, what we could certainly do is scale back some of the scope of the work, or basically do it in separate work orders so we can make sure we stay within whatever amount the council feels comfortable allocating. Sarah, is there anything you'd like to add? Okay.
Just as an example of how things change when you go through and you develop a project, one of the steps we took to familiarize all of the engineering firms with the project was to take them out on site. And I never thought we'd have to do an environmental assessment or possible remediation for a sidewalk project. We've never done it before, and we weren't planning on doing it. Based on changes in the legislation, based on changes in the rules, we now have to do that for sidewalk projects, which the engineers informed us of at the time we were doing the site visit. So things like that have added to the additional costs. There are 4 gas stations, I believe, in the immediate area of the proposed project.
You're saying for any sidewalk project or for a particular reason?
Apparently for sidewalk projects. Same thing with stormwater management. Because of increased requirements for the stormwater management practices at the state level and with the city as well. We have to be able to address the issues on-site, which could involve additional and more comprehensive stormwater improvements than we were initially planning.
I guess I'm still not sure I'm understanding. So if the city were to put in new sidewalks somewhere in the city, that is a whole other discussion, we would have to do an environmental assessment?
No, just because of this, because of the neighborhood that we're looking at doing. If once the engineers were down there and saw that many of the properties that are adjacent to the sidewalk are auto-related, 4 of which are gas stations, and a 5th is the U-Haul rental place. That creates some challenges as far as being able to identify and address what possible environmental concerns because of the nature of the businesses in the immediate area. If we were to do the sidewalk in front of your house,
Okay.
no.
I just wanted
This
to...
particular one, yes.
Yeah. And I didn't hear any suggestion that some of this money should potentially come from the stormwater budget. Is it because it's not for, well, why is that?
Part of the difficulty may be determining which portion of this project is actually stormwater related and which is not. I would say that the stormwater management fund balance is not that significant, and the speed camera fund balance is. And I think, Mayor Williams, as you've noted on many occasions, the stormwater regulations are going to become much more stringent, and I think we will probably need every dime we have in the stormwater management fund to do stormwater projects.
Right. But I wonder if it might be something that we would consider to say we take a very small portion of whatever this is to acknowledge that some of it is stormwater.
If that's something that the council would like us to look at, we can certainly do that between now and when the budget amendment would come forward.
I would think it might be helpful to just at least know, not spending a lot of time on it, but saying, well, it's really not any more than 5% or 2% or whatever it might be, so that if we said, well, we want to just assign some nominal amount to say we acknowledge this, that we would have that option.
We can certainly try to make that determination. I think the other thought in terms of the speed camera fund is the funding for this project is part of the broader capital project allocation in the speed camera fund. As some of the council members may recall, we anticipated being much more aggressive on some of the sidewalk work during FY12. Obviously, we will be doing some work related to sidewalks in the spring, but it's unlikely that we will spend the entire allocation that the council approved, just because of some of the back and forth over the actual sidewalk policy. But we will certainly bring back the information you requested, Mayor, and you can consider it at that time.
And I see 3 colleagues who have questions. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. Just as an aside, I had a conversation with Councilmember Reamer, who mentioned that the county is he expects, spend on the order of $300 million on stormwater retrofitting in response to new requirements. So there could be something for the city to explore there, whether we would have to do similar expenditures to bring our own stormwater management up to par with the new requirements. So the cost difference here, $80,000 to $175,000, is almost 120%. I guess I'll ask, why were we so off? Why weren't we on top of the change in regulations that you mentioned, for instance? And are we confident that all cost factors are now accounted for?
I asked my staff that same question repeatedly about why the cost was so significantly higher than what we'd originally budgeted. A lot of it has to do with just a variety of factors that all came into play at basically the same time. The changes in the regulations at the state level and an increased awareness of how they would impact our particular projects. Because this project is adjacent to the state highway and part of the right-of-way, it kicks us into another level than other streetscape projects that we've done before. and the regulations predate the work that we did on Carroll Avenue, for example. There were the scope of services was expanded somewhat to acknowledge things that we have learned in the last year as far as steps or product that the engineers could provide us that would facilitate the development of the project, and that may or may not be needed as we go through this design work, working with the community to identify what's important to them and how they want this area to be represented. So the scope of services includes a number of items that we may or may not need to have the engineering firm do, again, depending upon what the priorities of the community members that participate in this development process. So frankly, I think the estimate is a little higher than what we will actually draw down. I can't promise that, but it may be. Doesn't fully answer your question, but that's what I have right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we have an estimate, excuse my ignorance here, of the projected project cost for the whole project, or was that something to be determined by the work we're talking about right now?
When we originally pulled together the capital improvement budget, and it is part of the community legacy application, we had roughed out a project estimate with the capital improvements being about $320,000. Again, that figure will fluctuate depending upon what construction costs are by the time we actually get the project to the point where we're starting to dig, and what the ultimate design features are that are identified by the community.
Sure.
We're hoping that we can, those portions of the project budget that are not eligible for speed camera funding, we will be able to secure through the Community Legacy Program or possibly through the State Highway Sidewalk Retrofit Program.
Okay, so environmental assessment, suppose some environmental issue is found, would that necessarily require some kind of containment or full remediation cleanup, that is, noting for gas stations, there could be underground leakage, and so on, whether or not we go ahead with the project? What is our potential liability here just in doing the assessment? If we find something, will we have to clean it up regardless of whether there's a project, and what is the potential? Is it possible to put any kind of cap on there? I do believe that gas stations, if there's contamination, are required, the oil companies, the owners are required to pay for the cleanup, but this could be a long, drawn-out process, even if that's true. Sorry, I got a bunch of things jumbled in there, but you get the idea.
No, I understand what you're saying. It's my understanding that if there are environmental contaminants identified during this process, that we have the option of mitigating it on site. Basically, the dirt's pulled out. The triggering mechanism here are the holes that we have to dig for the trees to make them viable. They're fairly big, kind of deep, long. But the dirt or the soil that's removed in that process, we can mitigate it on site by adding additional soil materials to the dirt that we pull out of the hole, thereby diluting the environmental contaminants and addressing it to the satisfaction of the state on site. If that's not possible, then we'll have to go back and revisit whether or not we want to proceed with the project. And then the information would be shared with the adjoining property owners, depending upon what the possible contamination is. But based on the engineer's preliminary conversations and with conversations with the State Highway Administration, there's a high probability that if anything were identified, and we don't know for sure that there will be, that we would be able to address it on site that would limit the city's costs as far as possible mitigation measures.
What if there's evidence of active contamination? You could put up some kind of walls, I suppose, to create a bathtub there, and but if there are fuel tanks that are leaking at one of the nearby stations, and we discover that because of this assessment.
All of this will go through. We'll work in partnership with the Maryland Department of the Environment So that if there are bigger issues than we're prepared to handle or that we really don't know what to do about, we will be in consultation with them. I think we actually have to report it to them, if I understand correctly.
Right. So in any case, there's some degree of uncertainty here.
As with many projects, yes.
Well, unanticipated.
And this one is a little different than others, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Mayle.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up this project. It's obviously a landscape that could really use some landscaping. So in that sense, I really appreciate the idea of looking at this design. One of the questions I have, when you're at that intersection, it feels like you're standing in front of a football field worth of concrete. And I really wonder, and I would really be interested in the city engineer's perspective on how much of a difference the stormwater mitigation elements that you might put in are going to make in that intersection. It's such a big area of concrete, and I question whether the size of essentially the square footage we have to work with, whether you can really do enough there to really address that. If it's 2%, 3% of total runoff, it may not be worth doing those elements of the project. And then I'd say that for me, the community involvement of those neighborhoods right there is really going to be essential. They are very interested in redevelopment of New Hampshire Avenue and in that area, and really have talked to a number of people repeatedly about how much they wanted to see some changes happen. And so just making sure to engage them repeatedly. I've talked to city staff about that too, and I'll help with that.
Along those lines, included as part of this project are a series of community meetings. I believe 2, if not 3 or more public meetings. The first one will be held here at the Community Center on January 18th from 7:30 to 9 o'clock, where we'll be chatting with the community in the neighborhood to see how they want the area to look, what are the issues that are of concern to them. So we'll be having those ongoing conversations with them. Also, if people are interested, we have on the New Ave website an opportunity to an interactive map that's been established where people can go and on the map identify specific concerns, which will be then shared with staff and other members of the neighborhood and used as we go through this design process. But again, the first meeting is on January 18th, and anything you can do to help get the word out would be greatly appreciated.
I can do that. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
Are the boundaries of the study area, is that all in the public right-of-way, or is there projected to be any disturbance of private property?
We're anticipating there will be all in the public right-of-way, but again, going back to my comments regarding the scope of services, there may, depending upon how the project shakes out in the end, there may be a need to encroach on private property, and if that is the case, then what we've typically done in the past is not purchase a property, but buy access rights to it. And that could be part of this project, again, depending upon what the final design is. So it allows the city to go out and step on somebody's yard to make the improvements to the sidewalk, which are contained within the public right-of-way. Or if there's like a small corner of the sidewalk or the tree bed that encroaches on someone's property, most often people are willing to give us that right of access or egress access to that particular part of the property.
Okay. You mentioned the U-Haul property. Of course, that's outside the city boundary.
Correct.
But I gather, am I to presume that even though that's not in the city boundary, that because there's probably, I'm sure, USTs on that property, that those USTs could theoretically leak across into the area that the city's going to be doing work?
I don't know what an UST is.
Underground storage.
Underground storage. Thank you. I've learned something
I'm sorry.
today. Anything is a possibility.
I understand. Otherwise, I can't imagine.
Yeah. The border's fairly porous.
Yeah, the soils are
Yeah.
porous. The
And the border,
surfaces
yeah.
aren't. That's odd.
Yeah,
You
the
know,
surfaces
as Councilmember Mayle was saying, is that there's a terrific, a huge area of impermeable surface there. And in a sense, for the gas stations, that's what you want, so that the stuff that spills out of gas tanks and leaking oil transmissions doesn't permeate the
Right.
soil underneath. But also, I think I mentioned that at that intersection, the northwest corner, where that little, used to be a gas station, is now like a little haircut place and a truck, that used to be, I think, an Exxon gas station.
I think so. It looks like it. I'm
And
not
this-
sure.
and that may have disappeared before the time when the EPA was requiring those kind of places to remove their tanks. So the Lord knows what you're going to find on that corner.
I'm hoping we find nothing.
I'm hoping
They've been very good.
Yeah. The other
Done all their
thing,
due diligence.
well, this would be to Manager Matthews. When the amendment comes, I guess, will you be addressing the balances available in the speed camera funds? Because we know that that's a very fluid situation in terms of the volume of revenues that are coming in, and we really haven't had a recent report on that.
What I would suggest is perhaps I bring the budget amendment forward either the same evening or the week after I give you all the 6-month financial report, which would give you kind of a snapshot of where we are financially with the speed camera fund as well as other funds of the city.
Thank you.
And just a quick note that, especially for the newer council members, that generally we try to not take up budget amendments in the first half of the year, so we try and get to January before we go there, just because we want to see how things are looking, so that 6-month report that the city manager is talking about kind of gets us to the first hurdle of, okay, how do things look, and could we consider changes?
The only thing I would note is it's not uncommon to have perhaps a budget amendment in the fall, mainly because when we're preparing the budget for the council's consideration, it's sort of the best guess of the timing of projects. And one of the things that the more tenured members of the council may recall is, particularly with grant-funded projects, there's always a lot of uncertainty. So it's not uncommon in the fall to see a budget amendment dealing with some of those grant-funded projects. We also will typically make allocations to salary and fringe benefit accounts in the fall, once we have a final number, for example, for our health insurance renewal rates.
Right. I guess I'll qualify what I was saying as if there's ever an occasion for somebody to say, well, gee, we have a new idea and we really want to do X, we tend not to do it in the first 6 months of the year.
That's right. The next item should be relatively brief, but just wanted to give you all the heads up on this. I think most of you are aware that we received a grant for fiscal year 11 to have one of our officers participate in the gang task force. This grant was a little bit more complicated than many of them. Montgomery County acted as the fiscal agent for the city. We were sort of a sub-grantee to Montgomery County, but the overall grant, which was a federal grant, actually went to HIDA, which kind of is an overall Washington-Baltimore entity. We had a budget of just over $97,000, or just under $98,000 to be more precise, for this grant, and it was anticipated that the grant monies would actually be allocated between fiscal year 11 and fiscal year 12. In actuality, the grant money was expended faster than we had originally envisioned when the budget was prepared. We did get all the grant funding. It's just a matter of timing. So we had anticipated that for fiscal year 12, the grant would cover the officer's salary for the first quarter of the fiscal year, with the remainder of his salary being charged to the speed camera fund. Because of the timing of the expenditure of the grant funds, we will need to do a budget amendment to basically account for the officer's full salary and benefits in fiscal year 12. Are there any questions about that before I move on? The next item is a similar timing issue, and Sarah is here if there's any specific questions. This has to do with two community development block grant projects. We just recently finalized and executed the Program Year 37 contract with Montgomery County. There were changes in two project amounts for fiscal year 12. Those would be the facade easement program and the Crossroads Market. There will actually be additional funding allocated to both those projects in FY12 that will require an amendment to the Special Revenue Fund, which I think most of you know is the mechanism we use to track grant-funded projects. Sarah, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Councilmember Grimes?
Thank you. I'm unclear here. This asks for an explanation. Why it's the city's responsibility to fill a gap here if the project cost was higher than we had agreed? Or how did this work?
You're referring to the CBG projects, Councilmember Grimes?
The Community Development Block Grant Program is a special revenue fund program, so all of the dollars that are included within this budget or these funds are outside dollars. And because it still goes through the budget, we have to adjust the budget accordingly. But there are no general revenue funds or no city dollars that are impacted by it. It's basically an adjustment to the books so that it reflects the monies that are available for that specific project.
And what you'll see is actually an increase in the special revenue fund revenues and the special revenue fund expenditures.
So the net is zero.
The net is zero.
Okay, thank you.
But we do need to account for it. Okay. Just two last items. Thank you, Sarah. We have a 20-hour per week staff position that is currently budgeted in the General Government Department, specifically out of my office. The position is currently vacant, and as we often do when positions become vacant, we sort of look to see what they do, and is there a way to use those salary dollars a little bit more effectively. This position works at the main reception desk just outside the auditorium during the afternoon hours, and providing supplemental staffing at the desk. In talking to both the Deputy City Manager, who supervised the position, as well as the Interim Recreation Director, we think it would actually be a better managerial arrangement to actually have the position budgeted in the Recreation Department. Right now, we sort of have this odd situation where we have someone who is helping to provide desk coverage who reports to a supervisor in my office, but then you have the person who also works at the desk reporting to someone in the Recreation Department. We just think there'd be a little bit better coordination if both positions staffing the desk were under the same departmental umbrella. The Interim Recreation Director has also expressed some interest in perhaps having this position trained in some of the recreation registration programs, so if there were customers who wanted to come in the evening and register for programs, there would actually be someone who could do that and who was part of the Recreation Department. So dollars are not changing. We just simply think it would be a better managerial arrangement to have everyone supervised by the same department who's working at the desk during these hours.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. Where'd my note go? There it is. I support the transfer of the function, because I think you're exactly right, as you outlined. But I have a sort of, I guess it's a question, suggestion, and I don't know how the rest of the council feels, although some of us have talked about it. There seems to be a shortage of administrative support in the general government department, and at least several of us have talked about urging you to hire someone to provide additional support. It seems like the general government department is understaffed, is the way I would describe it. And so when I saw this, I was a little concerned about that. I support the function moving, but I think it would be really useful to have maybe a half-time, three-quarters time, I don't know exactly the amount of time in that general government department for a whole bunch of staff issues.
From a practical standpoint, the current 20-hour-a-week position, which is essentially an administrative assistant position, has not really been able to provide much general support in my office because they are staffing the main reception desk. And if you're here in the late afternoon hours, which I know many of you are, that is a particularly bustling time in the building with a lot of students in the building. So I do think there is a need in the afternoon, and I think just from sitting at the desk, there's just limits to what someone is able to do to help those of us who are working on the third floor. I think the other issue, Councilmember Snipper, that you raised, I would suggest we maybe talk about that as part of a broader budget discussion for fiscal year 13. I certainly appreciate the concern, for general government and my office in particular. I think like anything that the council does, you're going to have to juggle that perceived and actual need, I certainly think it exists, against the needs of other departments. And certainly there are staffing needs in other departments that I would feel in all good conscience I should bring to your attention and kind of talk those issues through. I have spoken to the mayor about perhaps the last meeting in January, actually having an entire evening council meeting devoted to FY13 budget issues. I have been having some preliminary discussions with staff about possible staffing needs. I'm sure there will be issues that the council itself is interested in or concerned about for the next fiscal year, and I thought it might be helpful before I start putting pen to paper if we could talk through those. So I could certainly add that to the list if the council would like to talk about that.
Yeah, January 30th will be that meeting because of, as the city manager noted, before she puts pen to paper, we need to do it then. Otherwise, she's started to put together her budget, and our discussion will be less useful.
Right.
Are there any concerns about the proposed position transfer, at this time? I mean, certainly you'll have an opportunity to review this again when the budget amendment comes before you, but... the last item has to do with the Public Works facility renovation. I had sent both the former and the current council members an email back in the middle of November to let you know about an electrical inspection issue. This was an issue that came up dealing with the existing electrical work at the Public Works facility, not specifically related to the renovation, but anytime you're going through a project and you have inspectors on site, they don't limit their inspection to the actual work that's new. They will open up panels, look at other things. It's a very old building, and basically he found some electrical work that was substandard and needed to be brought up to code. The estimated cost of that work, which was not anticipated back in October when you all approved Budget Amendment 1, is approximately $40,000. This would include the work to be done by the general contractor, Keller Brothers, as well as extended services by Sharon Consulting, our construction management consultant, as well as the project architect, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineer also had to do some design work. I talked to our construction manager today to get the current list of any change orders that are out there. In addition to the electrical work, there are a few other code-related change orders that are in play. The best information I have for you this evening is that we will probably need to appropriate about $50,000 to finish the project off.
So that's 40 plus 10?
Yes.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. The final thing we need to do this evening is to vote to convene in closed session, and that would be this. Yes?
Can I interrupt with one other issue on the supplemental?
Sure.
I think by email or verbally, I brought up the issue with a number of you of the letter we got from constituents in Ward 2 and 3 about a crossing guard at the Tacoma Junction. And if at all possible, I'd like to have that issue be something that we discuss when we talk about supplemental budget in January. And so if that's something that the city can develop cost estimates on, Barb, you and I talked about different ways that it could be done, and doing it near term with speed camera money versus long term trying to get money from the county. And I'd really appreciate it if others are supportive, trying to move that forward, at least as an outline of a proposal.
And I think you have been putting together some figures on that.
Yeah, what I will do is I have talked to staff about putting together some cost estimates if the council were to choose to do this. I can get that information out to you later this month, and then you can, when you meet in January, you can provide some direction to me as to whether or not you wish to add a guard at the junction.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay. Final call. Anything else? Okay. Now we will vote to convene in closed session, and that's to discuss a personnel matter related to one or more specific individuals, work performance, and possible discipline of an employee pursuant to Annotated Code of Maryland, State Government Article Section 10-508A1II. Somebody like to move the closed session?
Move. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Schultz. All those in favor, please raise a hand. All 7 are in favor. We will now adjourn and go back on the recess that we started before we had this meeting. And we'll see folks in January. We're adjourned.